In the year 1877, an American physician authored a book of guidelines on health issues for the parents. One such guideline included circumcision of any boy found to be fondling himself. This was to be done without any anesthesia. According to him, the pain will produce a salutary effect upon the mind, especially if it is associated with the idea of punishment. When it came to girls, he suggested application of pure carbolic acid on the clitoris. Phenol is carbolic acid. It is used for removing paint. His name is John Harvey Kellogg. Yes, that Kellogg, the one who makes cereals. And here is the key point to remember about him. He was not a sadist. He believed that he was saving the life of the child. Since, in 1877, it was a medical fact that masturbation was killing them. This belief had prevailed for 2.5 centuries. It was in the textbooks. It was written into asylum records as a cause of insanity. And it was completely, catastrophically wrong. But not entirely, because there is a real body count. Forensic pathologists have measured it. It's just nowhere near where anybody was looking, and the mechanism is nothing like what those doctors imagined. So let's start with where the fear was manufactured, because it didn't come from evidence, it came from a pamphlet. Around 1712, an anonymous pamphlet appeared in London called Onania, or The Heinous Sin of Self-Pollution. Nobody knows who wrote it. It's sometimes attributed to a surgeon named John Martin. It ran through edition after edition for decades, and later printings padded themselves out with letters from terrified readers listing their symptoms. It was, functionally, the world's first anxious health forum. It worked about as well as the modern ones, but a pamphlet is just a pamphlet. What turned this into medicine was one man. In 1760, in Lausanne, a Swiss physician named Samuel Auguste Tissot published L'Onanisme. Tissot was not a crank. He was one of the most respected doctors in Europe. He argued that semen was a concentrated vital fluid, and that losing it drained the body of its life force. Blindness, consumption, insanity, death. That's the moment it stopped being a sin and became a diagnosis, and it spread fast. In 1812, Benjamin Rush, a signer of the Declaration of Independence and the man later called the father of American psychiatry, published a treatise on diseases of the mind. Here is his actual list of what onanism produces: seminal weakness, impotence, consumption, dyspepsia, dimness of sight, vertigo, epilepsy, loss of memory, fatuity, and death. He ends the sentence with death, casually, like the last item on a shopping list. By the mid-1800s, asylums across Europe and America were formally recording masturbation in patient files as the cause of insanity. Doctors invented a disease for it and called it spermatorrhea. There were restraints, there were cages, there were actual patents. For 250 years, this wasn't fringe, this was medicine. So how did it die? Not with an argument, with a survey. In January 1948, Alfred Kinsey published Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, built on interviews with roughly 5,300 men. The proportion who reported having masturbated came out around 90%. Now, his sample wasn't random, and researchers have argued about the exact figure ever since. Doesn't matter, because whatever the true number is, it's enormous, and that broke the logic completely. If the behavior is nearly universal and the consequences are blindness, insanity, and death, then the population should have been visibly collapsing. It wasn't. Within a generation, mainstream medical texts had quietly reclassified the whole thing as a normal variant of human sexual behavior. And in every year since, across every data set we have, the number of people confirmed to have died from the act itself is zero, not low, zero. No case report, no autopsy finding, no mechanism. It doesn't deplete anything. It doesn't shrink anything. It doesn't cause blindness. And it never had anything to do with your palms, which should be the end of the video. Except morgues do occasionally receive these bodies. Between 1972 and 2004, forensic pathologists at the Institute of Legal Medicine at Goethe University in Frankfurt performed roughly 32,000 autopsies. 68 of those people had died of natural causes during sexual activity. That's 0.22%. 2 in every 1,000 bodies, almost all men, average age 59. The most common single cause was myocardial infarction, heart attack. Then in 2017, cardiologists ran the same question at population scale. Using the Oregon Sudden Unexpected Death Study, which captures every cardiac arrest in the Portland area, a team led by Oppo Aro reviewed 4,557 sudden cardiac arrests between 2002 and 2015. 34 happened during or within 1 hour of sexual activity, 0.7%. 32 of the 34 were men, so yes, this can be the last thing you ever do. But read the mechanism carefully, because it matters. None of those people died of sex. They died of coronary artery disease that had been building for 30 years, and it happened to finish during a moderate burst of exertion. Cardiologists rate that exertion as roughly equivalent to climbing 2 flights of stairs. If you're 25 with a healthy heart, that number has nothing to do with you. If you're 60 with untreated cardiovascular disease, it still isn't about sex. It's about the disease. But that study buried something far more important, and almost nobody reported it. Of those 34 cardiac arrests, every single one was witnessed. A partner was in the room. And bystander CPR was performed in only 1/3 of cases. Read that again. The one person capable of saving them was right there. And 2 times out of 3, nothing happened. They didn't die of sex. They died of hesitation. Now, some of you are already typing. What about aneurysms? Doesn't orgasm burst blood vessels in the brain? Fair question, and the real answer is better than the myth. In 2011, a team at UMC Utrecht led by Monique Vlak published a study in the journal Stroke. They took 250 people who had survived a ruptured brain aneurysm and reconstructed exactly what each one was doing in the moments before it burst. 8 activities came out as triggers. All of them spiked blood pressure. Sexual activity was on that list, at roughly an 11-fold increase in risk during that brief window. But here's the context the headline stripped out. Being suddenly startled scored higher than sex. So did straining on the toilet. Also on the list, drinking coffee, drinking cola, and blowing your nose. And when the researchers worked out which trigger accounted for the most actual ruptures across the whole population, the winner wasn't sex, it was coffee. Not because coffee is dangerous, but because people drink an absurd amount of it. That's the entire lesson in one number. A big relative risk attached to a rare event is still a rare event. And in this case, the risk only matters if you already have an aneurysm you don't know about. If you're avoiding orgasm because you're worried about your brain, you're probably more likely to have to worry about something as ordinary as a sneeze. So, where are the actual deaths? They do exist, but they have almost nothing to do with masturbation. You've probably heard the claim that autoerotic asphyxiation kills 500 to 1,000 people a year in the United States. It's been repeated in journals and textbooks for decades, but that figure was never based on a proper study. It goes back to a 1,983 estimate built from unpublished figures from Canada and England, and nobody ever went back and properly re-established the number. When researchers finally looked at the evidence, reviewing every autopsy in Alberta, Canada, from 1985 to 2009, they found 38 cases. That's roughly half a death per million people per year. A later review in Quebec found an even lower rate. Scaled to the United States, that puts the number somewhere in the low hundreds, and possibly below 100. But those deaths are real. And this is one of the few places in this entire subject where the danger is genuine, while the public understanding of it is badly distorted. The danger isn't the orgasm itself, it's the lack of oxygen. Pressure on the neck doesn't have to be dramatic to become lethal. Forensic reviews have estimated that around 11 pounds of force can be enough to close the carotid arteries. That's about the weight of 1.5 gallons of milk. The jugular veins can be compressed with even less force, at under 5 pounds. Once the carotid arteries are closed, consciousness can be lost in roughly 10 seconds. That's what makes the situation so dangerous. There may not be enough time to recognize that something has gone wrong and correct it, meaning that the safeguards people imagine they have can fail very quickly. There's also another mechanism that makes neck compression particularly dangerous. The carotid sinus is a pressure sensor in the neck, and compressing it can sometimes trigger a sudden drop in heart rate. In rare cases, the heart can stop altogether. It can happen without the kind of dramatic warning people might expect, even in someone who is young and otherwise healthy. That is the part of this subject that actually deserves a public health warning. But because the subject itself is embarrassing, it's also the part that rarely gets discussed openly. Because while we spent 3 centuries being afraid of this, the evidence quietly went the other direction. In 2016, a Harvard-led team published the largest study of its kind in European urology. They followed 31,925 men from a 1,992 questionnaire through to 2010. Men reporting 21 or more ejaculations a month had roughly a 20% lower rate of prostate cancer diagnosis than men reporting 4 to 7. It's observational. It's self-reported. The authors themselves flagged that frequency partly reflects general health, and association isn't proof. Fine. But notice the direction of travel. Medicine spent 250 years insisting this was draining the life out of you, and the best data we have says that, at absolute minimum, it isn't. And yet the fear didn't die, it just changed passports. In 1960, an Indian psychiatrist named Narendra Nath Wig gave a name to something he was seeing constantly in his clinics. He called it DOT syndrome, from the Sanskrit dhatu, meaning vital fluid or elixir. These were men, often in their 20s, arriving at hospitals genuinely convinced they were dying, exhausted, weak, losing weight, unable to concentrate. All of it, they believed, because they had lost too much semen. Every physical exam came back normal, every single time. What they had wasn't a deficiency. It was terror. It's in the International Classification of Diseases, not as a myth but as a recognized clinical presentation, because enough people were arriving in enough distress that medicine had to build a category to hold them. And in 2004, a paper in the British Journal of Psychiatry pointed out the part that should stop you cold. This isn't some exotic, faraway condition. The identical anxiety runs all through the historical medical records of Britain, the United States, and Australia. It's the same fear. It's Tissot's fear. So here's the honest answer. Masturbation has never killed anyone. Not once. Not in any documented case. In any country. Ever. What kills people is a heart that was already failing. A vessel that was already weak. A partner too embarrassed to start compressions. Or an oxygen supply cut off in 10 seconds by something that has nothing to do with pleasure and everything to do with hypoxia. Every one of those is a story about something other than the thing you were told to be afraid of. On the 1st of December 1994, the Surgeon General of the United States, Dr. Joycelyn Elders, was asked at a UN conference on AIDS whether masturbation should be discussed in schools. She said it was part of something that perhaps should be taught. 8 days later, the President of the United States demanded her resignation. She explained afterward what she'd actually meant. She said she was talking about teaching children that nothing terrible will happen to them if they play with themselves. She was right. It was demonstrably, measurably true and had been true for decades, and it cost her her job. Kellogg reached for the carbolic acid because he believed silence was more dangerous than pain. He had it exactly backwards, and we have spent 300 years proving it. The shame has hospitalized more people than the act ever has. The thing that could kill you here was never inside your body. It was always the thing nobody would say out loud.